Buongiorno, benvenuti.
Good morning and welcome.
Allora, benvenuti, siamo molto felici.
So, welcome. We're very pleased to host a meeting here at Santa Maria with Professor Riccardi, Mother Yvonne, to open questions about our times, about the church, life in the world, the lives of peoples in the light of the gospel. And of course, in this church, in this basilica, we have often prayed together with many religious for peace and the future of the world, remembering martyrs and praying those of you who have been kidnapped. There are many religious in the front line. We don't want our hope to be kidnapped, so to speak, and that is why today we're connected with many friends, long-standing and new friends, both consecrated and non, throughout the world, from Argentina, Chile, Ecuador, El Salvador, Paraguay, Peru, the Philippines, India, Japan, and many European countries, the United States, and I could go on. This network of friends wants to leave room to questions, but first and foremost, I'd like to thank you not only because you are here and because you help us by supporting the community of Sant'Egidio in many ways. I'm thinking of the DREAM and the Bravo programs. I'm thinking about the Humanitarian Corridors. Many of your congregations contributed to the reception and integration of people and the work with the poor to obviously relieve them from the hardships of life on the streets often sees us together as in prisons and in many other places alike. So, I would just like to thank all of you, and I would like to give the floor to a friend, Mother Yvonne. Of course, you need no introduction, but I would like to say that for many years we have come together, and I remember a critical moment in Sudan when a community of Salesians was in danger, and we met. We were young at the time, much younger, and we came together for the good of everyone. Mother Yvonne, I leave you the floor, and thank you for having accepted to introduce Andrea and the questions you will raise. Thank you, Don Marco. I would like to thank you for the invitation I received to be present at this moment, at this basilica, which is so dear to us, accompanying with Don Marco, Andrea, and it is a joy for me to introduce this reflection on the future of Christianity, paying special attention to the role that religious life can play in its evolution. We are here in the presence of a group of people, both lay and religious, and we know that we are connected with many friends all over the world. This is the nice thing. There is a lockdown, but there are no borders. We are always able to connect with each other throughout the world. And we all feel strongly motivated to be together right now without borders or without barriers of culture, religion, diversity of vocations. I live this moment as a new experience in the heart of unprecedented historical times, with all the ensuing uncertainties, concerns, and hopes for new opportunities. We can say that these are times of fire, to allude to the title of Andrea's book, The Church is Burning, La Chiesa brucia. When I saw this title for the first time, it immediately touched my heart and made me want to read it. The symbol of fire has always spoken to me, arousing in me fear of fire that can cause death, and also because it evokes warmth, the light, and the love that the Holy Spirit continually bestows on the Church, on each and every one of us, and that is force of life, of permanent creativeness. Fire also speaks to me of contagion, if sufficiently strong, when the wind blows. If instead of a fire, there is a weak flame, when there is a strong wind, it blows out. If instead the fire is strong, there is a strong wind, and it spreads. And I thought of the words of a young woman at the USMI Annual Assembly. We were a group of 300 senior superiors at the time. She said, "A big fire burns in your heart. We ask you to support the small flame that is present in our hearts as young people. This flame is very weak and needs to be sustained and nurtured." It's very nice to be able to share together with people of different vocations what we carry in our hearts. I was very pleased to be able to read Andrea's book because of the courage of the questions he raises. A church deeply rooted in a changing world, and the church itself is affected by these changes, by these profound movements. The courage to ask oneself questions that may seem uncomfortable, but which prompt us to seek pathways that can be openings. The development of this afternoon's theme has been entrusted to Andrea, who is well known not only in the church circles for his high professionalism as a historian essayist, founder of the community of Sant'Egidio, a reality of the church that is particularly responsive to the appeals of our times, listening to the word of God and the poor, through its activity of conflict mediation and closeness to the poorest in all contexts, to help set up humanitarian corridors that, in collaboration with other organization states, assure safe and orderly immigration from countries such as Lebanon, the Horn of Africa, and to various nations in Europe. And in particular, it's a sign that there are solutions, that they do exist. Tonight, he is with us in his capacity as Andrea, a historian and essayist, and above all, as a staunch Christian who loves the church, who talks from within the church, but who is not afraid of asking himself questions, because love leads us to want a bigger life that is more in line with his vocation, to accompany us in this reflection on the situation of the church in today's world and in the future. Andrea focuses his attention in particular in this particular context on religious life, whose current development has an important impact on the whole church. The starting point of his talk will be his recent book, which also gives the title to our webinar, The Church Burns, the Future of Christianity, which I have read with great interest. A bit because I'm French, when I saw that it began with the fire at Notre Dame. I cannot tell you because it's difficult to explain how I felt. I was in the United States at the time. I couldn't bear the sight of that fire because it was as if the world were collapsing. So, the symbol used by Andrea, starting from this experience, touched me very much. The contemporary world in which we live, a context that is by and large influenced by new conditions which have become established very quickly, often without having the time to accompany changes rather than preceding them, often without even grasping some of the dynamics which would help us enhance its vital forces. These profound changes already existed even before the COVID-19 pandemic, but the pandemic has made them stand out and has magnified to an extent that we have not yet fully grasped because we are at the heart of the story. The title is very provocative. The church is burning. The first question that emerges is about the meaning of the verb to burn. As I was saying, fire can be interpreted in many different ways. It can destroy and purify, and it can reduce to ashes, and it can lay hidden gold bare. In the Gospel, Jesus says that he came to bring fire to the earth and refers to evangelization. He certainly did not leave things as they were. And I believe that by studying, and I'd like to thank Andrea for his courage in focusing, in highlighting the transformations, the causes for the crisis, the reasons for the crisis that the church is going through, but also he has highlighted or has tried to highlight the crises that affect man, helps us position ourselves and reflect together. And I think that thinking and reflecting together in our times of communion, all congregations, consecrated life and lay people, the different religions, is what will help us find the pathways to the future. So I believe that this afternoon, Andrea will help us enter this crisis, which I don't see as an issue, rather an opportunity, an appeal, a launch towards the future, providing that we can experience this inner communion, seeking together with all the light that the Holy Spirit can give us, and in listening to His word, but also listening to the people, following events, looking at circumstances. And this can help us understand the way ahead. But we know there is a great deal of vitality, and this is a sign that a crisis can also be a source of life. Thank you, Andrea, for this moment, and we will now listen to you with all our heart.
Grazie, Madre Yvonne.
Thank you, Mother Yvonne. I believe that the questions you addressed to me are very numerous, and I'm afraid I won't be able to answer all of them. The first thing I'd like to say is that I'm very pleased about this meeting with you who are here. I'd like to greet you, but I'm also very happy, and I would like to greet all those who are connected with us. Now, I'm very happy because, as Mother Yvonne said, we are not living in easy times, and we need to look at the future together with faith and boldness full of hope and realism. Difficult times, it would be sufficient to just recall the pandemic that has changed things so much and has highlighted the frailties of people, institutions, and situations. We are now at a moment in when we need to start again, hoping that the pandemic is over, while it isn't in most parts of Latin America, in some African countries. We are going through difficult times, complex times, not just for the Church. This is a very important aspect in our reasoning because the crisis concerns all of us. It concerns politics, democracy, and the Church too. Today, it seems that the Church is less credible, not only because of moral scandals or economic management, but it seems to be less relevant, not in terms of power, but less relevant in the lives of people. Pope Francis himself, who was greeted with a blaze of sympathy, is perhaps less popular today, if only because of the wear and tear of time which doesn't make anything last and leads to the wear and tear of everything. There are a number of indicators that show that the Church is not in good health. A decline in vocations, not only religious, but also priestly ones, with the underlying problem of many communities who lack a priestly ministry or sacristy, but also there has been a decline in religious practice, which concerns, in particular, European countries. The United States, yes and no. And the difficulties of religious life, contradictory difficulty, because religious life can also be a place of great vitality. It's a place where we can give proof of the generosity and missionary nature of the Church. But, however, there are fewer and fewer religious. And also the challenge represented by a new form of Christianity, which is not ours, the one of the Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant Christianity, Pentecostal Christianity, or the Christianity of prosperity, very strong in Latin America. And here we're faced with a very unusual religious phenomenon, a religious phenomenon that in a century has gone from 0 believers to 600,000 believers. As Yvonne mentioned, I have reflected on this crisis in a recent book, The Church is Born, that starts off from the fire at Notre Dame in Paris and from the question that many asked themselves whilst the church was born. It's not the church that is burning, it's not the cathedral that is burning. Isn't it a sign that the church is burning? And this is a question that not only believers ask themselves, but non-believers too. The lay people, humanists who said, what will the world be like without the church? I'm not a believer, but what will the world be like without the church? Someone thought that my book was merely pessimistic. Well, you see, very often people don't want to face reality, and so they say they're pessimistic. I believe that we need to tackle reality and free ourselves from a lazy and providentialist attitude, because having faith does not mean twiddling your fingers or thinking about other things because the Lord will take care of this. Now, in this book, and I won't discuss the book in detail, is a cry of love for the church. The belief that we are facing a crisis, and as Yvonne was saying, this crisis can be an opportunity. It is not the end. And it's also a contribution as a historian, because, dear friends, history helps us not to remain prisoners of the fears and feelings of a moment, tied to a moment. Sometimes one has the perception that this decline in the church is unstoppable. But instead, we are challenged by this crisis. We are challenged to live a struggle. And I'm going to use the term agonic, from agony. In the past century, Miguel de Unamuno wrote a beautiful book entitled The Agony of Christianity, in which he stated, agony does not mean death. Agony, in the profound Greek meaning of the term, is not death. It's not feeling resigned, but it means struggle. It means fighting. But who wants to fight today? And to what extent is faith, and let us think of the Apostle Paul, is connected with fighting with one's bare hands? And every full-fledged fight for the church is at the same time a fight for everyone, for society. And today, for Christians and for religious, it is very easy with their homes and their institutions. It is easy to be tolerated in a niche, as the niche of statues that you see in this basilica. You are resigned to the idea of decline, and this is easy for the religious, but it's also easy for lay people. But actually, decline deserves a response. Living the crisis with a passionate struggle. But I'd like to specify, it's not a struggle against something or someone. Someone who is excommunicated or discredited or attacked, because very often the church is tempted to engage in head-on clashes, like every institution, because head-on clashes, excommunications, make you feel alive, especially if we consider that the media really loves to see and witness these clashes. They like to see people quarrel, because that is a source of news. That makes news. And I repeat, the crisis doesn't concern the church alone. If you think, and we're old enough to remember not just 1968 but 1989, when we hoped for the spread of peace and democracy following the fall of the Berlin Wall, there is a worldwide crisis. There is a crisis in the way the international society works, and this is evidenced by wars. But let's move on to us. Pope Francis, at the very beginning, in 2013, had understood that the spirit of resignation that marked the church, and he had talked about this on various occasions when talking to the religious superiors, and especially in his apostolic exhortation, Evangelii Gaudium. He spoke of the individualistic sadness originating from a comfortable and mean heart when it does not enjoy doing good, resignation of Christians, of religious, and when there is no enthusiasm in doing good, and I would like to say in doing better. So, in 2013, he proposed the missionary conversion of the church, going out, reaching out to others, to reach human peripheries. With confidence, he said, because words have a providential nature that we cannot foresee. So he said, we carry this treasure in clay pots. Let's move out. Was this naive? How was this received? What was the reaction? Well, many compliments, but mostly it was faced with a rubber wall. We can say that the message of Evangelii Gaudium was accepted, assimilated only in part. And I could say this in the case of many countries in the world. First and foremost, Italy. I remember when 2 years later the Pope attended the conference of the Italian Church, and he said, read the Evangelii Gaudium and live it, experience it. But this also happened in Latin American parts too, and in Africa too. I remember a parish priest in Abidjan who told me, if I leave my parish church, who's going to be left in the parish church? And often the strength of words, yes, it's true that their churches' messages are too many, and this was something that the Pope conceded, but the strength of words is relative to the church, and this is the thing that worries me the most, when the strength of words becomes relative. The Pope spoke and went back to pick on this theme. Synodal journey, and synod is not a magical word. I studied synods of the 20th century, and I attended the synod in Rome. Often these are just nice books, well written, and experience it just put there. But synod or synodality should involve everybody in the light of the gospel and bring us into history. That was Bergoglio's plan, a church that goes out into the history. Well, we can say that Bergoglio came fresh as a bishop from a global city like Buenos Aires, large, pulsating with life, and marked by misery and by the poor. This is the testbed for the Evangelii Gaudium, as it is in the Conference of Aparecida. That's where we see the problems that he saw, and that's where he gave a response. Evangelii Gaudium was the manifesto of a church that wanted to position itself in a world changed by globalization. This is the issue. The world has changed profoundly as a result of globalization, because globalization has been a silent and profound revolution. There are revolutions that make people's head drop off, like the ones that our French friends started. There are revolutions that spread blood, and even the fall of the wall led to some bloodshed in Romania. But the global revolution was perfect. Not one drop of blood, but it was very deep. Boundaries fell, walls fell. What was distant has now become close. Let's just think about the topic of migrants. What is virtual has become decisive now. Immediacy. Think about text messages. You need to answer immediately. The idea of thinking about an answer or taking time to reach a decision, that's just not on anymore. And above all, a dimensional life that is individualistic. So the affirmation of the self, not to talk about the economy and other transformations, the transformations of employment. Bauman, a Pole of Jewish origin who had the pleasure of meeting, taught extensively about the personal fallout of personal consequences of the global revolution. He said, look, men and women have changed in the global world. They have the same faces, the same names. They look the same, but they have changed. And then the humanity in globalization feel lost, unprotected. Let's just think about migration. Once again, migration is nothing new. Italians emigrated in Argentina at the beginning of the 19th century, of the 20th century, sorry. They immigrated to France. Let's think about the Portuguese too. So, lost, unprotected, and hence the walls, which are not just walls to stop migrants, but are represented by nationalism and sovereignty and fundamentalism, all ways of protecting oneself from the global world. Until, as you said, Yvonne, we were no longer able to ignore globalization because it has arrived in the past year and a half with the pandemic, and it knocked on our doors. Borders no longer existed. They didn't protect us. Despite Johnson opens and closes, it has to save lives or the economy. I didn't understand. So the borders didn't protect us. The virus entered our homes, and each of us were dragged into the globalization and found oneself more frail. Globalization has taught everyone that there is no protected corner, a nation, a country, a sect, because there is a common destiny. Now, not everything was negative in this pandemic. Many worked hard and did a lot in the community of Sant'Egidio and around Sant'Egidio. I witnessed a movement of people who obviously were engaged in doing good for others and in solidarity. But then I perceived in these times a search for meaning, the meaning of life. Now, dear friends, we talk extensively about secularization, which is a fact. But today, the issue is not secularization, but globalization. That's what's changing men and women alike. Because today, there is a search for spirituality. And they say that without spirituality, that spirituality is good for your mind and body and psyche. Well, it depends on the spirituality, eh? And then, in society, there is everything, but there's less anti-Christianity and anti-clericalism. And those who have lived long and think about history are aware of this. So, you see, dear friends, in these times, in this difficult situation that the world is facing, in which we discover ourselves global, and faced with unpredictability, because globalization is unpredictability, from the inner turmoil of the church, what emerged was the Fratelli Tutti, all brothers. So, in part, the Evangelii Gaudium was not assimilated entirely, and Fratelli Tutti does not come from a fresh pope who still has with him that smell of Buenos Aires, but it comes from a pope who has experienced the difficulties of the world and of history, but the discourse of Fratelli Tutti was already present on that 23rd of March 2020 in St. Peter's Square, when the Pope said the gimmick of those stereotypes with which we mask our egos have fallen, and what is left uncovered is that blessed common belonging as brothers. And there is a self-criticism that the Pope initiates. We have continued it, thinking that we could remain healthy in a sick world. We cannot carry on alone and saving oneself on one's own. So I'd like to say that in the pain of the pandemic, from the Pope and from the fabric of the church and from the pages of the gospel, for everyone, for religious, there is a proposal of fraternity. I have talked with the Pope time and again about the need for a text on peace, because I believe that this world is too accustomed to war. Now, it's true that the Pope spoke about peace in this text, but he positioned this in an overall vision of fraternity. And in this respect, Christianity is not a past that needs to be preserved, but it is a proposal for the future, addressed to Christians and human beings, all brothers. In 1990, a person who was very dear to me, Father Alexander Men, who's married and had withstood the difficulties and was the last victim of the KGB, said, Christianity has taken but its first steps in the history of mankind. The history of Christianity is only beginning. All that has been done in the past is only the sum total of attempts to bring it about. So, the history of Christianity is only beginning. And after all, in this pandemic, in this crisis, we have the word end, or do we have the word start, beginning? Well, yes, of course. For those who remember the Second Vatican Council, we lack ideas about the future. In the encyclical, the Pope says a project with major goals for mankind sounds like a delusion today. And it's true. The great beacons of humanity have been extinguished. The Pope asks them, what do certain expressions mean, such as democracy, freedom, justice, unity? And it's true. There's very little talk today of peace, and yet there are many wars. Where is the peace movement that was a very strong movement too? Or ecumenism? Have we all resigned to the division of Christians, despite the fact that the Lord said that we have to be one? But there are some commandments that cannot be ignored. So the beacons have been turned off, and the global scenarios are dominated by the invisible hand of large economic interests or power groups. And this is a fact. History is not made by states nowadays. I don't have any nostalgia for the past, but I'd like to say it. And yet the Pope, with the ingenuity that, or naiveness that only an elderly person can have, because at a certain point, at a certain age, you become resigned and you say, it's up to the others to build the world. The Pope's dream is the following. We dream of one humanity as wayfarers made of the same human flesh, as children of the same earth, each with the richness of his faith or beliefs, each with his own voice, all brothers. This dream may seem to be utopia. In the present-day world, writes Francis, the feelings of belonging to the same humanity are becoming weaker, and the dream of building justice and peace together seems to be a utopia of other times. We see how indifference dominates, that is cold and globalized, product of profound disillusionment, that hides behind the deception of illusion, believing that we can be omnipotent and forgetting that we are all in the same boat. And the Pope is being very pessimistic, or is making a very harsh analysis of our world. And yet, he has a big dream. Everyone on the same boat. A common humanity, but this is the utopia of the gospel, dear friends. The gospel doesn't only generate spiritualistic feelings, but the gospel generates a strong love to change the world. Christianity is just at its beginning. Now, that the world is human and connected is what the gospel calls for, and with it, the voice of the poor and the excluded, the prisoners of poverty and war, prisoners of meaningless life. And Here there is a request for love. There is a request for a dream. In the global world, we are all connected, and we saw this through the contagion. So this unity in destiny was evidenced by COVID. We cannot start from where we were before. Today, we know that when your neighbor's house burns down, my own house is at risk too. And so we need a dream. And as you know very well, dreams are recurrent in the Bible. Cardinal Martini used to say, and I remember him talking from this table here, and he spoke many times in this basilica because he was a dear friend of ours since the times in which he was at the Gregorian or the Biblical. He used to say there is always the need of the support of a dream, a utopia, against which to measure ourselves and measure the present and adapt possible actions without being stifled by minor daily emergencies or being misled by the clamor or blandishments of the moaners of the day. Now, an Archbishop of Milan, as he was at the time, the largest diocese in the world, full of problems, was fully aware, as we all know, what it means to be stifled by minor daily emergencies. You feel good because you're fatigued from work. There is a sacrifice deriving from minor daily emergencies, but this doesn't save us. It's not enough. It's not enough to do everything we need to do. We need to have a dream. A dream stemming from the pages of the Gospel, so much so that the Pope places at the center of the encyclical the parable of the Good Samaritan. Those who ask themselves questions as a result of the Gospel abandon the everyday circuit and shares a dream in his or her community, in a city, in his own environment, in the world. And here, please allow me to say something that concerns our spirituality, but also our way of living too. Today, with the global revolution, men and women live a new existential condition. They live where they are, in a neighborhood, in a city, in a place, as usual. But they also experience a universal dimension that reaches them through the media, that reaches them through migrants. And I'm thinking of Syrian refugees, witnesses to a terrible war, migrants who are calling us to measure ourselves against a universal mission. But this is not merely a religious, where the life of a congregation is already a small form of globalization, because religious people have invented globalization even before we started talking about this. And so the Pope says we must pay attention to the global dimension to avoid pettiness, and at the same time we must not lose sight of what is local and what makes us walk with our feet on the ground. So local and global. This is man. But this is the Christian of the 21st century. The man of minor works, of the small parish, but also the man who can't ignore that in Syria there's a war, that Ethiopia is collapsing, and that in Mexico there are masses of refugees moving up. But this is also true for our prayers too. We pray for our neighbors, but we are also called to pray for those who are distant, and often praying for the distant is the only way to fight for them, because prayers secretly protect the world, and prayers open us up to the dimension of grace. Prayers may seem useless, but they are actually decisive, both for those who pray and for the world. I was always surprised to find in between the lines of Carbard, a Protestant theologist, who was always very strict. I was always surprised to find this quote. This God does not work differently if we pray or don't pray. There is an influence of prayer on action and on the existence of God. Our prayers are miserable and frail, but that's not important. What is important is that God listens to our prayers. And this was Karl Barth. So, faced with my local world, the global world, faced with the work of a religious that can be a drop in the ocean, today's dream that we should not abandon, as we have in part abandoned evangelicarium, to tell the truth, and nobody wants to really hear this, is Fratelli Tutti, all brothers. But this leads me to a question. Talking about fraternity in a difficult, hyper-technological world could be perhaps too easy. And yet, this is essential simplicity, because what is missing in many environments, in many worlds, is being brothers. There are worlds dominated by solitude and emptiness. Where does populism stem from, if not from the rage of lonely people and excluded people? People don't live in a vacuum in the major suburbs. Whilst you may be close, you are on your own. And this brings us to the topic of mafias that we're only too familiar with in Latin America, in Italy, and in the world. Mafias. Because you can't live in the vacuum of solitude. On the contrary, you can die of solitude. We have seen many COVID victims who were living alone in homes for the elderly, places that are full of solitude. And these homes are a scandal in societies that have received a major gift. We have received the gift that many grandparents dreamt of, a long life in Europe, but also in Africa, in Asia too. But what do we do with this long life? we close or shut elderlies in homes because we don't know how to manage or handle their lives. So, dear friends, dear brothers, dear sisters, in this crisis, and as you've seen, I haven't talked about my book, even though here and there are some. So in this crisis, Fratelli Tutti launches a movement of thoughts and feelings around fraternity that can mobilitate us all in the difference of our vocations. Each of us, even with his own bare hands, can make this current of love and fraternity grow. And obviously we're familiar with the phrase of the Jewish tradition, whoever saves a man saves the whole world. But the Quran teaches us that whoever kills a person is as if he has killed the whole of humanity. And whoever vivifies a person will be as if he had given life to the whole world. This is something that all of us can experience when you help, when you vivify a person. It's the world that is saved. When a homeless person finds a home, in that house there is the salvation of the world. So, brothers, all brothers, is not just addressed first and foremost to states, but it's addressed to ordinary people. And what I've always admired in religious people is that religious people have always considered themselves as ordinary people within the church. That is to say, through their vocation, but among the people of God, not above the people of God. This is the great work of the religious in Africa, for example, who animate the people of God. And in this respect, the religious were never perceived as something external, as a hierarchy from the people of God, by the people of God. And so the Pope addresses ordinary people, both Christians and everyone alike, because this is an encyclical addressed to everybody. And this was something that the Pope was criticized about, because this is not an encyclical just for Christians. Havel, a man of resistance, who resisted communism in Czechoslovakia and the first president of the democratic state, spoke of the power of the powerless. All brothers wants to arouse the power of the powerless, of ordinary people. Each man, each woman, a small community can set in motion a process of fellowship, of dialogue and social friendship. Even the small can move the big. Even the small can change the world. But how? Starting from oneself. Yes, of course, because the key to Fratelli Tutti is conversion. As Martin Buber wrote, beginning with oneself is the only thing that counts. In conversion, you become craftsmen of peace and transformation. Bauman had seized the message of Pope Francis. I remember I was present when he met him in Assisi, and he said a few words to him, but he said, "For me, you are the light at the end of the tunnel." And the Pope was surprised and said, "Nobody ever told me something of the sort." And he said, "Yes, because I had lost hope, and you were the light at the end of the tunnel." And Bauman says, the intention of Francis is to transfer the fate of solidarity and collaboration from the obscure sphere of politics into the streets, workshops, public spaces where we ordinary people meet and talk. Remove the theme, the destinies of integration of humanity out of the hands of those who rule, to place them in daily encounters between neighbors. Is this a dream? I would say a wind of fraternity that each of us can blow. But look, globalization of communication has made us all impatient. You need to reply instantly. But the wind of fraternity changes the world in patience, in a day-to-day stubborn and faithful process. So assimilating the Fratelli Tutti requires the boldness of patience. And we need to avoid, and with this, I will move to my conclusions, as Bergoglio says, to entrust our future to the invisible hands of liberal individualist visions. The market alone does not solve everything. And he also says many things, but I'd just like to mention one sentence. You need to desire a planet that ensures land, housing, and work for all. But the other risk is populism, as Bergoglio says. Populism is a mass of lonely individuals who identify with a leader and are pitted against an enemy. The problems of my country are foreigners or an arrogant neighboring nation. Populism is based on conflict and hatred. No. Fratelli Tutti and the building of fraternity in day-to-day life. And the Church has a deep connaturality with fraternity. In early times, as you know, the term Christian took some time to become consolidated as the term church. Cyprian of Carthage called the church fraternity. That's how it was called in the earlier term. Adelphotus or fraternitas. And religious communities were set up as fraternities to fulfill the ideal of the gospel and the church, and have become globalizations of fraternity. And so each religious person feels part of the local church or the local territory where he or she lives, but also part of a global mission that others fulfill in a different way, perhaps. Christian communities have to be the seeds of fraternity, solidarity, and peace. There are too many distances in this world, too much hatred, too much violence. For many, the other is dead in anonymous megalopolis and in the major suburbs, but also in rural areas, but also in small and medium-sized towns, which have become appendages, basically. And what I can do to revitalize this fraternity, but we can do this through encounters. And to this regard, I'd like to say that to live in a global world that is so unpredictable, we need brothers and sisters. You can't be on your own, because the global world will just sweep you away. So, in other words, we need a nest from which we can fly off towards the global world. So, fraternity means taking care of others. Yvonne, you talked about humanitarian corridors. And in our experience of humanitarian corridors, that brought Syrian refugees in Italy, France and Belgium. In Italy, 3,500 Syrian refugees from the Horn of Africa and Lesbos. And in this experience, we saw that when a country takes, or a village or town takes care of a family, that town or village is reborn as a result of this fraternity. Why? Because taking care of people makes us brothers. But a religious community, when it hosts some refugees, is more fraternal. Because the poor person is that discarded stone on which we'll use to build fraternity. So, dear friends, we need to make the wind of fraternity blow, and each of us can do this by seeking what unites us and setting aside what divides us. And the wind of fraternity will slowly bring down walls, and the wind of fraternity will regenerate human fabric after the crisis of the pandemic, because we see the post-pandemic period as some measures adopted quickly. No, we have to have our grandmothers teach us what it means to slowly mend through a human fabric with the patience that we no longer have, because when something breaks or is torn, you just throw it away. But we can't throw away human fabric. It needs to be sewn together with the needle of fraternity. And I will now move on to my conclusions. Fratelli Tutti talks about peace and war. A religious might say, can I make the wind of fraternity blow in my environment, in my neighborhood, but with wars that are the product of factors that are beyond the control of states? What have I got to do with this? Let's listen to the Pope. War is not a ghost of the past, but a constant threat. Dear friends, we have accepted war far too much. The generation that reminds us of the horror of war has disappeared, and war is everywhere, in the Mediterranean, in Africa. But for many, these are their wars, not our wars. But when the house of the neighbor burns down, even your house will burn down, and refugees are the witnesses and ambassadors of the horror of war. The Pope says, every war leaves the world worse than it found it. The war never makes the world better, and we have to shout this out because we, as Christians, have the historical experience of the horror of war. But the sense of history has been lost, and often nationalism and violence become a sort of drug for people who have lost their heart, who have lost their mind, and have lost the sense of the value of human life. I've said it. What is distant concerns us. It concerns the prayers of religious people, the prayers of the community. Fraternity is never short-sighted. What merit do you have if you love those who hate you or those who know you and live within under your same roof? The whole world concerns me. In the light of a fraternal vision of the world, we need to feel the tragedy of war with its suffering, destruction of the environment, but human and natural death, refugees, hatred, terrorism. The Pope says that war is the failure of politics and humanity. And I would like to add, war is the worst of poverty. It is the mother of poverty. War makes the rich poor and the poor poorer. War is a wretched school for youths. Let's think about terrorism, jihadism. That isn't just Islam, radicalized Islam, but also protest. Today, in many countries, jihadism has replaced what was Giverism. But this is something that I will leave for another occasion. In the encyclical, the Pope urges all of us to be guardians of peace. There is a task for institutions, but we, ordinary people, are not merely onlookers. We are all craftsmen of peace, and we need to dare more against war through a creative revolt. We should not be indifferent. Even information is vital, because information nourishes prayers. They killed the president in Haiti and his wife, but I'm not from Haiti. We don't have a house there. What can I do about it? But no, that information is a stimulus. Prayers are a cry for peace. And you know that the community of Sant'Egidio every month in this basilica and in many parts of the world where it is present pays for peace by making a rosary with the names of the various countries, because those wars are the wounds on Jesus' body. We need to abandon personal and community egocentrism and look at the world by undertaking solidarity-based initiatives, vigilant conscience, and above all, through prayers. The church burns, the world burns. And hence the role of dialogue with religions, and I can't explain it now. When reading All Brothers, whilst I was preparing this speech, I was reminded of a day in October 1986. There was Don Marco too. I was in Assisi. His hair was black and long like this, a bit bushy. And Pope John Paul II had invited religious leaders to pray together at Assisi. And at a certain point in his speech, he said, "Peace awaits its prophets, its builders. It is a building site open to all, not only to specialists, to scholars and strategists, but it involves the 1,000 minor acts in daily life." And at the time, I felt with the community of Sant'Egidio the duty to devote ourselves as much as possible to peace. Because the men and women of fraternity are the builders of peace. An important Italian, Luigi Sturzo, in 1929 stated, "It is necessary to have faith that war will be abolished." 1929. Then we had 1939, World War II, and so much more. But think about his reason, his dream. He said, polygamy has been abolished, in part, but it has been abolished. Slavery, serfdom, and family revenge have been abolished. Can't we abolish war one day? The world after the pandemic needs a great dream of fraternity and peace that enhances the frail strength that we ordinary Christians, ordinary but not indifferent or commonplace, that we Christians, people of God, have. The Pope says, faced with the various ways of eliminating war and ignoring others, we can react with a new dream of fraternity and social friendship that is not limited to words only. And I believe that this is a dream for all. But I believe that this dream is for the religious, because the religious are not the product of an institution, but are the product of a dream. Because you are religious, because you believed and believe in a dream, and because the religious are men and women of gratuitous, because they do not live according to the rationale of earning or losing, because the religious project themselves into the world as if every country were their homeland. When you go to the cemeteries in many countries and you read the names of the religious who died there, thousands and thousands of kilometers away from their country of origin, that is their homeland. One day in Mozambique, I visited the home of some religious to hold a meeting. There was an Italian elderly religious man, and I told him, "But Father, do you ever come back to Italy?" He said, "No." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Because I'm afraid of dying in Italy." And I said, "Well, why?" It's easier to die in Mozambique than in Italy. But if you die in Italy, there isn't even enough land to bury me. Look here how much land there is. Look here how many friends I have. So you see, building fraternity, building peace day by day will help Christians who are a little tired, and a tired church to find its missionary vitality. I have nothing else to add besides this, but I believe that this message that we get from the pandemic, that is emerging from the pandemic, is for our lives, but it's also to communicate it to many tired Christians. And I believe that the religious who are the product of this dream, who live this gratuitous life and feel this world of all brothers and all sisters, are the first to receive this message, not because they're already experiencing this, no, but simply because they know this language, this jargon. It's our background. So I'd like to conclude with the words of a great poet, a Christian, a religious, named Davide Maria Turoldo, an Italian, or rather a person from Friuli. We tend to be a little localist. Restore me to childhood, Lord. Make me a child again, and restore me to the true taste of things, to the flavor of bread and water. Time has limited my senses, making them impassive. Lord, save me from indifference, from this anonymity of an adult man. This is the evil we suffer without being aware of it, and that deprives us of poetry and faith. Lord, he goes on to add, save me from the gray color. Lord, save me from the gray color of the adult man, and make all the people free from this aging of the spirit. Give us back the ability to weep and rejoice, and let the people go back to singing in your churches. And is the prayer and poet. And this is my hope for the church. And this is my hope, which I would like to address to all of you. Thank you.
Grazie.
Grazie, Andrea.
Thank you, Andrea. I will immediately leave the floor to Mother Yvonne, but I need to stress the about 60 messages and more that are coming from all continents. Many have stressed gratitude for this window of fraternity and for having touched painful topics too. The painful topic of the elderly, for example. Others, the sense of the mission and of religious life. I think that time went by very quickly, and I don't think we have a lot of time for debate, but maybe one reaction. There is a question that concerns women in particular among these messages, and asking you what the contribution of women is in the communion of the church, which the church hasn't yet understood in a profound spiritual sense. Anything else, perhaps, or should I answer anybody else? There is the issue of women. I cannot but think of youths. The future of the church is in youths. So this fraternity is important to them, and it can touch the hearts of youths today. Yes, please. In this crisis of our times, of changes, I was wondering whether, in terms of structure and institution, ecclesial institution, whether we need to embark on a journey to have greater participation of people and on lay people. Maybe we have focused too much on priests. Maybe we perhaps we need the people of God to take the church in their hands.
I'm sorry, I will speak in English. Slowly, of course. And, oh, sorry, it's the mask. The church is burning. It's been burning for quite a while. Go to Ireland, it's been burning. Go to Quebec in Canada, it's burning. Now in Eastern Canada, it's burning. And in many other countries. What I believe is true, what the fellow has just said, we need a church that everyone feels 100% part of. Man, woman, child, elderly, and maybe the church has been its own worst enemy because of, as Francis says, clericalism, a hierarchy. The church has ruled the lives of so many people. Go to Ireland, go to Quebec in Canada. And I fear, well, I don't fear, but I love Africa. I have spent many years there, but there are signs of clericalism and institutionalism, and we need a church that considers all, that empowers all, and certainly women need to be empowered. Thank you.
Grazie. Mi dispiace che deve fare molta strada.
I'm sorry you have a long walk to make to the microphone. You have spoken extensively about the Pope. I think there is a proper situation. The Pope thrilled the world because of his language, his way of talking that was understandable by many, to the crowds, the people in the squares. I don't think the church should use fire. Or should the church use fire and melt its liturgical language? I mean, there are many words that if you don't explain them, well, they are incomprehensible to many. I've worked with youth and I have had to explain the word Savior or heaven, or these are all words that are very typical of religious language, but liturgically they are no longer understandable. So I think there is a language issue within the church, especially during liturgical communication.
Direi che diamo la possibilità.
L'ultima.
Let's take one last question or comment. Thank you, Andrea, for stressing this fraternity as a horizon suggested by the Pope. Now, thinking about the world of the religious, I believe that one of the things that goes in this direction is not focusing on institution, but on the charisma, the Holy Spirit that, through the founders and foundresses, has kindled a new fire. And this charisma needs to be lived in the charismatic family, i.e. religious people, lay people, who share the same inspiration, spirituality, and charisma. I think that this is one of the important points to stress and experience today. Thank you. I would have been pleased to discuss it, but Don Marco is very clerical, says that we can't go on too long, and Mother Yvonne is supporting him. When I think that when the Council talks about the people of God, it talks about the church of everybody. And as somebody quite rightly was pointing out, there is the issue of making walls fall down and not to deepen moats and divides. We are faced with the problem of women in the church. But let me put it like this. When women objectively are the majority of the people who support the ordinary life of the church, because if you go to a parish, besides the priest, who is a male, we see women, many women, those who prepare the liturgy, but women are used. Or is there a community where there's reciprocity? I think that's the issue. Often, if Dokimov wrote in 1970, so years ago, the issue is that our parishes do not spread light because in these parishes there's no reciprocity between men and women. This is not something questionable, but it's something profound. It's something to do with complementarity. We have impoverished the church by making it only for males, and even in patriarchal times, when men used to rule, the family was less chauvinist in general than the church, because mothers and wives had their way of existing if they could, of course. And in the 19th and 20th centuries, after all, mothers general were a unique expression. There is the book, I can't remember the author, that says that when they didn't count in society, they used to buy, sell, and build. And I think that this is a major issue, and you quite rightly pointed out the crisis of our times. The ecclesial institution is creaking. Now, my idea is that the issue lies in the institution, in an institution that is all male, where it's not sufficient to place some women here and there. Yes, it's fine. I'm not against this, of course. But we need equality, which is not something political or but something patriarchal. We say that we're missing priests, but many other things are missing too. So the people of God as a community, and this is fraternity within the church. In my view, this is essential. And in my book, I say there is a crisis that concerns males, men. Men of today are not like men of 50 years ago. My father used to say, I'm the boss at home. Everybody used to laugh more or less, but he used to say that. Imagine a man saying this today. So men have gone through a crisis. They have to reconsider their role. And there's also a crisis of priests. So priests were supposed to be fathers, but there's the crisis of fathers. A teacher, but there's the crisis of teachers. Head, but there is the crisis of men who act as heads. So there is an important background that we need to understand. But it's not a tragedy. Listening to the gospel and helping each other without preclusions, without fears, we can change a great deal. But without preclusions and without fears, this, in my view, is the fundamental fact. The church is burning is a warning, but the church is burning is also a call. And in this respect, I believe, and I agree with the contribution of the last speaker, the issue of the religious is the return to the charisma, but also leading a more charismatic life. And entering the charismatic space of the church, which is also the space of lay or secular movements and laymen, and hence the dialogue with youth and language, to some extent, religious language or jargon is always another language because it comes from far. But there is a mediation that we need to make in friendship and in communion. And mediation can be achieved in doctrine or catechesis, but through friendship in meeting the poor and walking side by side in life. Our experience is that youths who are naturally distant, they're not distant in hostile terms, and hostility conceals a question. Distant naturality doesn't hide anything instead. I think that the issue of youth is or has to do with meeting the poor and starting from the poor, as Pope Francis teaches us. That is when you can understand the major questions in life and the major religious questions. But I could go on, but we can't solve the world. But I'm very pleased because in the history of Sant'Egidio, there was always great friendship with all the religious communities. There is a space of people, for people to, that needs to be broadened. And that's why I'm saying that the religious need to be involved. Sometimes there are situations of difficulty, but we need to console and support and broaden this fraternal dimension of participation in Christian life, because only in that way we can be part of history. Let's take a look at traditionalists. Traditionalists have challenged the change in the church profoundly, saying, oh, we're the church of always. Yvonne, you're familiar with this, which is the home of some traditionalism, some also. They have become a small sect, but our ambition as a church is to be a people of God with open doors, not to be a small sect with rules, liturgical or other rules. And in this respect, I have major hope in this pandemic. And I believe that the religious are key players in this, starting from the fact that they are among the people and among the poor. And in this respect, I am very much attached to the encyclical Fratelli Tutti, because this is the second message of Francis that we cannot just allow to drop. And I think that today's world needs fraternity, and the Church is the sister of fraternity and is fraternity itself. So thank you for your attention. I would like to greet all of you. I'd like to thank Mother Yvonne and Don Marco, and thank you for your attention. And thank you for all those who were connected. I saw Don Marco's phone on fire. It's not the church that is burning. We'll have to obviously make a petition and a public subscription and buy a new phone for him. Yvonne, you are a wise woman, more than me. I'm not wise, so I'd like you to just say a few words by way of conclusion. Yes, thank you, Don Marco. Well, first of all, thank you, Andrea, on behalf of all of us, of all those around the world who have followed us in the course of this afternoon, who are always connected with us. You have spoken to us very clearly, very openly, and at the same time highlighting the elements of the crisis, which is not death but agony, and at the same time hope. You have spoken about thinking about humanity, and I was thinking that I have a worldwide family. When I go from Los Angeles to Samoa, I'm still at home, and I say the world is mine. In religious life, being present in many parts of the world, as you, the community of Sant'Egidio, there are no borders, and the steady presence of the world with everything that it goes through, its hopes, struggles, concerns, wounds, is really part of our lives. And I can say that religious life right now is thinking about and seeking a way in which, through together among charismas and with lay people, we can be a sign of God's love down among the people through our presence. People ask us to be present, to be a sign. And I'm thinking about those people in Damascus in Syria who said, yes, we can hope, we can have hope because you have remained. Some signs given together. I mean, none of us today can believe that they can find a solution on their own, either individually, as a group, or as an association or congregation. But together, yes. Together, we can find ways through the communion, as you mentioned. And I also appreciated, you didn't say it so much today, but in your book you speak about this alliance between men and women, and the alliance between different cultures and religions, which is the sign of this fraternity. The future is within us, and we have to build it, not on our own, because the Holy Spirit and God is present in the heart of this world, and works, but we cannot be overwhelmed by events and situations. We need to decide what kind of future we want to build as a church, as a religious life, as lay people, religious life together. Every decision, every step is already a future that is beginning. So I'm doing something new. You can't see it, but together we can help each other. We can see the many signs of fraternity and share them, and see the signs of novelty that are emerging, that are not yet entirely visible but are present, and that are signs of hope. Together, starting from this event, we can start again with a stronger hope, because a crisis is a source of new life. It's a stimulus, and the love present in our hearts is always creative. Love is always fertile. Thank you.